Hi everyone, my name is Maulik, and my research study focuses around using game theory to analyze challenges and solutions in the Tigris-Euphrates basin regarding transboundary water governance. And so, contextualizing kind of the region and the dynamics before I kind of talk about what I did. The Tigris-Euphrates Basin is really where mankind civilized, right? It was the home to Mesopotamia, the first modern civilization, and that was totally centered around water. The Euphrates and Tigris were the first bodies of water used to fertilize crops and to domesticize agriculture. And the two rivers flow through Syria, Iraq, Turkey, and Iran. For the purposes of my study, I only focused on the Euphrates and Turkey and Syria. But obviously, the dynamics between Syria and Iraq, Turkey and Iraq, Iran and Iraq are still very important and are pretty contentious right now as well. So just introducing you to Turkey. Out of Turkey and Syria, Turkey is obviously the more powerful, wealthier, and larger of the two nations. Turkey has the eighth most powerful military in the world. Its GDP per capita purchasing power parity is close to $44,000. It's home to 85 million people, and it's nearly 800,000 kilometers squared in size. It's a secular republic led by a democratic government and is a member of NATO, which is largely aligned with the United States and the European Union. However, in recent years, Turkey has increasingly shifted from that position to more of a neutral stance. And Turkey's population is expected to slightly decline by the year 2100. Syria, on the other hand, is an Arab nationalist republic led by a hereditary dictatorship. It's led by Assad. Syria has the 60th most powerful military in the world. Its GDP per capita purchasing power parity is only $3,000. It's home to 22 million people, and it's much smaller at only 185,000 kilometers squared in size. Syria has been embroiled in a civil war since 2011, and it's largely aligned with Russia and doesn't really have much of a diplomatic relationship with the West. Its population is actually expected to double by 2100, so it's a growing nation. Syria-Turkey relations have been complex, and starting in the Cold War, they were obviously very tense as Syria was aligned with the Soviet Union and Turkey was aligned with NATO, and there were many territorial disputes, including Turkey annexing a province of Syria in 1939. Tensions really escalated between Turkey and Syria due to dam projects on the Euphrates rivers between the 80s and the 90s, and Syria's support for the Kurdistan Workers' Party, which was an insurgent party against the Turkish government. They reached a détente in 1998 with the Adana Agreement, which marked a turning point, with Syria agreeing to cease supporting the Kurdistan Workers' Party. In 2000s, they really had a honeymoon phase where Turkish Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who you can see in the picture, and Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, who's also in the picture, and they're both currently in office today, marked really a close personal bond, which led to increased economic ties and diplomatic ties. However, starting in 2011, with the Syrian civil war, relations were severely damaged. Turkey supported opposition groups against Assad, hosted millions of Syrian refugees, and conducted military operations in northern Syria to counter Kurdish groups it considers terrorists and to establish safe zones. Moving on to climate change, which is the other dimension of the paper, and drought. Climate change, as you know, has had extremely devastating effects, and those effects have increased dramatically in the past couple years. 93% of heat events and 2/3 of droughts are attributed to climate change. And in the Tigris-Euphrates Basin, that has meant rainfall has decreased to only about 18 millimeters per month. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change predicts a cut in the flow of the Euphrates by 73% by 2050 because of climate change. And then the Iraqi water minister has also issued an even more dire warning, saying that the Euphrates could dry up by the late 2040s. And so when you get the dynamic of population growth, and obviously water is a resource that you need, But you also have the dynamic of climate change that really intensifies the risk of water wars. And water wars are nothing new. The first water war took place in 2500 BCE between Sumeria, in Sumeria between the states of Lagash and Umma. The so-called war over water in the 1960s and the Jordan River Basin between Israel, Jordan, and Syria led to, it was a hot shooting war. There was also a 6-day war between Israel and the Arab states, which is quite famous. And one of the main causes of that was water. In 2021, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan engaged in a 3-day border conflict over a water supply center, leading to 41 deaths and the evacuation of over 10,000 civilians. And in a recent example of a fatal water conflict, Iran and Afghanistan had a short conflict in May of 2023 over the Helmand water basin, resulting in 3 deaths. And with the whole situation with Israel and Hamas, water isn't the main cause for the war, but it's definitely a weapon that's being manipulated by both sides to basically hold respective populations hostage. And so, again, you've had water conflict in the past, but you've seen an increase as climate change comes in, as you can see in this graph, and you've seen an increase in water conflicts in Western Asia that are fatal, that result in casualties. And so, moving to this water relations between Syria and Turkey historically, they haven't ever really been pretty, but they really hit a kind of hard relationship in the 50s and 60s when Turkey, which was obviously much wealthier, started building dams. Eventually, those tensions cooled through the early 2000s because Turkey promised to release 500 cubic meters of water per second down the Euphrates, which was kept in agreement in the 2000s when Erdogan and Assad were particularly close. But unfortunately, that obviously changed with the civil war. And in 1975, moving back a little bit, they actually almost reached a hot war. Turkey began basically building a new dam at the same time that Syria was withdrawing a dam in that area, which led Iraq downriver to basically run dry in a time of drought. Iraq blamed Syria, Syria blamed Turkey, and those tensions really inflamed until we had some deaths and we were very close to an all-out war between Syria and Turkey. Saudi Arabia came in, mediated the whole situation, and they established what was called a joint technical committee to improve communication and mediation between the nations, which kept them in a détente through the 2000s. And eventually, obviously, that fell apart, and the JTC is now defunct. So question 1 of my study was really, with this historical context in mind, are we coming close to a conflict again? And to answer that, we have to determine what creates conflict. The first thing is stressors, external or internal factors that build up tension over time, and shocks. Shocks are small momentary pricks that release some of that tension. And as it relates to the stressors on the Syrians, they're the ones receiving the stressors, and they're more likely to be engaging in the shocks against Turkey. And so let's go through some stressors that Syria is facing. One is GAP, not the clothing company, but the Greater Anatolia Water Project, which is Turkey's project to build 22 dams. Many are already completed, which will basically have the capability to completely dam up the Euphrates and reduce it to nothing but a trickle-down river. Water shortages in Syria, particularly caused by GAP, drought, lack of optimized water usage, and other factors, is also a major stressor. Half of the people in Syria are drinking unsafe water, according to the UN, and Syria will see a 40% decrease in water availability per capita by 2050. Famine caused by drought is another stressor. Since 1980, Syria has seen a 75% loss of its wheat crop and a complete loss of barley. Today, 60% of their population is food insecure. And then obviously the Syrian civil war is a horrible internal stressor that has caused 500,000 deaths, millions of displacements, and just a complete plunge of the national population into poverty. And all it takes for the stressors to really explode into a hot war is a single prick. And so we move to the bargaining model of war, which is kind of a theoretical explanation, a more game theory explanation of how conflicts arise. And basically, the way it works is the two nations are are put on a linear line ranging from 0 to 1. where 1 is country A's preferred outcome, is 0 is country B's preferred outcome. The variable P is assumed to be the probability of winning a conflict with the cost of both sides being labeled CA and CB. By subtracting CA from P and adding CB to P, it's possible to discern the points that represents payoffs from the conflict. However, between these 2 points, an area exists in which reaching a bargain would allow greater payoffs for both sides. The point of the bargain is represented by X, which gives a better solution for both sides in conflict. So the bargaining model basically states that as long as you have entities who are self-interested, rational negotiators, they will always choose bargaining over conflict. But we know that's not the case. So what are the exceptions to the bargaining model? One is uncertainty. Incomplete information refers to the situation in which states involved in the dispute do not have a full and accurate understanding of each other's capabilities, intentions, or resolve, which obviously mean they can't assess the probability of winning a conflict. A commitment problem is also another occurrence that leads to conflict when states have difficulty making credible promises or commitments during negotiations. In the context of IR and the bargaining model of war, they can manifest in several ways. The largest way is that a state can anticipate the other state becoming increasingly powerful in the next few years, which means that they are unlikely to commit to a bargain right now because it might be better for them to actually strike and beat this enemy when it's still weaker. The final way the bargaining model doesn't work is when a good is not divisible. Obviously, water is a divisible good, but there are goods that aren't divisible, and you can't really apply a model of divisibility to an indivisible good. So we don't have to worry about that, but we have commitment problems because we know that Turkey will get stronger and Syria will get weaker moving forward. And we have significant uncertainty because their diplomatic ties are not close at all, and there's no communicative body that exists between them. So we can pretty much establish that conflict is likely in the future. And so the second set of questions is what's the most effective set of solutions to avoid conflict? And there's many, but you have to evaluate, you have to optimize. You can't do everything, and some are unrealistic. So how do you evaluate these solutions? And the answer to that, at least in my study, was game theory. And so I only have 15 minutes to present today, so I'm not going to go into all the details. But basically, we were able to express each nation's preference as a utility function and just use simple prisoner's dilemma games and then some long-form games to really try to figure out what a nation's preference is and what is most realistic. Unfortunately, it's pretty hard to control for incomplete information and commitment problems. It is possible with Bayesian games theory, but that is very advanced. So what came out on top? Overwhelmingly mediated communication oriented solutions. And if that sounds familiar, that was what the Joint Technical Committee was. And so you may ask, how realistic is this under a historically tense relationship? Well, first of all, there is potentially a new détente created in large part by Turkey's shift towards neutrality between the US and Russia, and also by the Israel-Hamas war. Assad and Erdogan have found common ground in their anti-Israel positions. If you actually look at articles from just yesterday and today, you'll see that Erdogan and Assad have become closer just in the past couple of weeks, as Erdogan really ramps up his anti-Israel rhetoric. So there is potentially a détente coming that makes it the right time for a JTC. And in conversations with former Syrian and Turkish water officials, the time is right to revisit a JTC. So reapplying the bargaining model, we can see why Syria would want to negotiate. In an X amount of years, as Turkey gets stronger and the probability of their victory increases, the bargaining range for Syria is going to decrease. Syria has an advantage by bargaining now and potentially getting a better bargain rather than waiting and bargaining later. Additionally, because of climate change, the 0 to 1 actually shrinks because the resource that we're partitioning, the water, we get less amounts. And so again, that bargaining model becomes, that bargaining range becomes even smaller for Syria, and they really, they're at a moment where they cannot wait to negotiate. Turkey has for years pushed a joint technical committee, so it's no problem for them to negotiate. But Syria really needs to step up their game and pursue negotiations now, or they really risk potentially just losing out on a good bargain. And then you may ask, does that really do anything? So first of all, I think it solves the uncertainty problem, where the JTC is all about communication, and it potentially solves the commitment problem because you're very unlikely to decommit when you're already in negotiations. It isn't a foolproof solution for the commitment problem, but it's an incredibly strong solution for the asymmetric information. And if we go back to 1975, the Joint Technical Committee and the communication is what averted the conflict, and eventually what kept them in détente as long as that JTC was active through the early 2000s for 20 years, 30 years, sorry. And so the conclusion is that the best solution is to reestablish a JTC, similar to the one that existed in the late 20th century. As it relates to my next steps, I'm looking forward to finishing up my paper. I've pitched some opinion pieces to reach a wider and more general audience. Aim to publish in the fall, hopefully in an academic journal, and then adapt my academic paper to be a policy white paper. I'll be briefing Turkish officials on my study in October, and I'm working with former Syrian officials that really helped out in my study on trying to find a way where I can brief current Syrian officials. And I'll also be giving white paper briefings in the early spring next year to ministries of foreign affairs and their respective Middle Eastern units and their staffs on my findings. And obviously staying in touch with academics and NGO leaders working on this topic to look for avenues for the formation of a JTC. I want to make sure that I'm able to play a very small part on the work that they're already doing as we reach an optimal time for negotiations. And so before I end, a huge thank you to my CCIR mentors, Dr. Stephen Shadowan and Dr. Michael David Mangini, and then special thank you for the extensive review and feedback from others. For this presentation, I'm grateful to Stephanie Ali, Dr. Ike Fryman, and Ambassador Paul Wolfowitz for their feedback. And of course, to my parents and family, thank you very much for their support and patience. Please feel free to contact me. I wish I could talk more about kind of the math behind the study. So there's my email. And if you want to see where my sources are, I've included a QR code. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And bravo, Maulik, for just a very overall impressive and pressing presentation on an important matter. I'm excited. We're excited to see where you go with this. And it seems like it really is on you to really, get this out as soon as you can, in a way while still maintaining the quality and thought you've put behind it so far. So again, I commend you on this amazing project.